Why, hello there, old sports. Have you ever worried about a game you like getting an update or remaster or just a new fresh coat of paint that doesn't live up to expectations and feels like disrespect to the original work even though it's made by the same people? Yeah, that was me with Lisa Definitive Edition. Anyways, Off 2025 is pretty good. Now, I'm not exactly sure how I should structure this review, so far I just have some notes and a few scripted sections where I want to talk about certain aspects of the game. But before I get into any of that silly stuff, if you just want a plain, no information, blind opinion on if you should buy Off on Steam, yes, I do think you should go buy it. It's only $15. I bought it on, sale for 15% off at, $13 if I'm doing the math off the top of my head correctly. So, I think it's a good experience. I think the game is fun. I think the music is nice. I think all that stuff that makes a game is good. And I recommend you go play it, because Off is very much a game that you want to go into blind. Considering the original Off was free, or at least the English translation I played was free, I would have paid $15, $20 for Off originally anyways, so I think $15 or less is a good price point to pay, especially considering all the touch-ups this game has gotten. So, again, I think it's worth the price, even if you've played the original Off. If you just want to support Mortis Ghost, go buy the game, go buy the merch, whatever. I'm not sponsored or anything by Fangamer or whatever. I just want to say, if you were a fan of the original Off and want to re-experience the game with a fresh coat of paint, please go support this game. Now, to address the elephant in the room right off the bat, I just realized that was a double pun because of bat, I was trying to emphasize the off there, but bat is technically also a pun because of the batter. I'm getting off topic. Alias Conrad Coldwood made the original soundtrack for Off back for the 2008 release. Since the game was free, and he and Mortis weren't expecting the game to get as big as it did, he used a bunch of samples when making the songs. So when Fangamer approached him and asked him to make possibly more songs and to license the old ones, by his own admission, he kind of got cold feet, and he just was kind of unsure about all of the legalese going on, and ultimately decided to not allow the music to be used for the new release out of fear of again, just various legal issues. I just want to explain this because I'm sure if some people return to the series and open the game and realize the music is different, they might be upset or just be curious as to why the music is different. Now, obviously, anything new would have a hard time living up to the old soundtrack just by default, considering how intertwined Off's music was with the experience of playing Off. So much of the game's beautiful atmosphere is from the music, and when you change the music, you change the atmosphere, and to some extent, you change Off as an experience. I am aware people will be pushed away by the fact there's new music, and they'll just, by default, not want to give the game a chance. While I can understand this, and even going into the game I was expecting the music to just be kind of bland or generic, I am very pleased to say that I really did enjoy the music. Now, I am in no way good at making music or understand how music is made, but I do like listening to music, so if I could give my completely unprofessional opinion, I believe that the music strikes a good balance of trying to capture what was so good about the old music while trying to be its own thing, because I feel like if they just tried to go after the same vibe the original music that did, it wouldn't really work, or it would feel sort of disingenuous or cheap. So I'm glad that they did try to go in a different direction while also making sure it kept that same lonely, desolate, echoey, just industrial feeling that the old game's music had. However, I understand how personal music can be and how personal one's music taste can be, so I don't want to speak for others and say the music is good or it's a suitable replacement, when for others it might not be. But coming from someone who was very much leaning negative towards any new music, I was very much pleasantly surprised, so the fact that it was able to break through my negativity bias I feel like says something about how the music is good. I want to reiterate, the music slaps. I just know for some people it may not feel like off because it isn't the original music, and sometimes it doesn't capture those same feelings, or it captures them in a different way, or a whole number of things. Now personally, I believe the new soundtrack does a very good job, especially considering the soundtrack it had to live up to. I think it fits the atmosphere, and I think it makes the game good. Now, I obviously prefer the old soundtrack, but again, the new soundtrack is very nice. The only reason I'm not using the new soundtrack in this video is just because I was not able to find a way to rip the files from the game very easily, so I'm using the old one just because I have those files on hand. So please forgive me there, I just wanted to explain that because I understand how that could be confusing to anyone watching this review. I know some people are going to be turned off by the fact that Toby Fox is working on the soundtrack for this project, and I can understand that, but the music doesn't feel like something you would hear in Undertale or Deltarune. It feels like something you'd hear in an off fan game, if that makes any sense. I feel like it really does fit the world. Don't worry, that you're not going to start a fight with an enemy and you're going to hear the Megalovania notes start playing. No. I feel like Toby Fox, as well as everyone else who worked on the soundtrack, because it isn't just him, did a very good job making something that honors this world. Many of the area themes feel somber and kind of industrial, and then also the battle themes are pretty catchy and jazzy. Speaking of the battles... Now I'm gonna be honest, the combat in the original OFF was never its strong suit. In fact, I think the combat in the original 2008 release was the weakest part of the game. You weren't there for the gameplay as much as you were to experience the world and the story and the sounds and sights. At best, OFF fell into the common RPG trap of just hit the boss with the strongest move you have and occasionally use healing items, to just mash attack and you'll win eventually, at worst. Long time ago, when I started this channel, I was originally going to make a video where I tried to play through OFF without ever using any items, and I scrapped the video because it was too easy. I felt like the video wouldn't be entertaining because it was just me beating the game, because none of the bosses put up a fight. Half the time, either you would be able to have enough competence to get through any fight you would need to, or you just wouldn't even need to use any skills, you could just spam attack. Most common enemies were really not unique whatsoever. The most interesting thing about them was their design, but you couldn't even really appreciate that for very long because they would get purified in 1 or 2 turns, or 1 or 2 actions, as turns and OFF are a bit more nebulous. Even the Zone Guardians didn't feel like they had much identity beyond their characters, or they just didn't have much identity in battle is probably a better way to say it, because while their characters were very interesting, it just felt like it was just fighting a normal enemy, but they have a bit more health and a cool theme. In the original OFF, my favorite fight was Sugar, and that was because it felt like she had enough HP to last a while, as well as she had some interesting status effects she could apply. So it felt like you actually had to be on your toes, and you actually had to use status curing moves, or you had to apply status effects to her to mitigate those attacks, and it was actual combat and actual strategic thinking, you know, like you would expect from a turn-based RPG. All in all, if I had to choose one word to describe the combat in the 2008 release of OFF, I would choose serviceable. It's not terrible, it doesn't make me want to rip my hair out, but it's not really interesting either. It exists for a purpose, and it fulfills that purpose, but it's not really that fun. However, I am very glad to say that the 2025 release of OFF gave the combat system some very needed improvements. First of all, you can still see the bars that show the progress towards another action for you and your party members, but next to the enemies, there's also this little diamond that fills up that shows when they're about to act. I'd also like to add that I played the game on the unrelenting speed/difficulty, so things may be different if you play on a lighter mode, so keep that in mind. When you're in a menu, the progression diamonds for enemies pause, which I think is a nice addition, so you don't have to just mash through you don't have to mash through menus and not see what you're doing. You can actually be strategic and think of what your next action is going to be. It's amazing how something as simple as just showing when your enemy is going to attack does such wonders for a combat system. Now, I'm sure this isn't something unique to OFF, but this is a type of turn-based combat I don't see very often, so I'm more surprised that they're using it here, or I mean, I haven't seen it often outside of OFF. So, forgive me if this is kind of bare bones. Another thing that I think is a good improvement is the critical hit system. Whenever you are about to get a crit, your bar will start to glow golden and look like it's kind of like electrified or just has energy coursing through it. And not only does this make your next hit do more damage, it also speeds up how quickly the action bar fills up. And this applies to enemies as well. The diamond will have that same electrified energy crackle around it when their action is progressing. Another important thing to mention is how in combat, crits don't just help you do extra damage, they'll allow you to heal more from healing skills or healing items. It will allow you to gain more competence from competence items or defending. And that's another cool thing. When you defend, you get 10 competence points back, as well as, or it's CC in this game instead of C, the other word, which I'm glad because that was an awkward acronym and I didn't want to say that. So you get more competence back when you guard if you have a crit stored. So I think that's a cool little system that's implemented. Knowing when your enemies get crits also allows you to defend or attack them first to try to get them out of play before they attack you and do a crit. So just having knowledge of when you're going to use critical hits, as well as having knowledge of when the enemy is going to attack, does wonders for the combat system, as I've said. The status effects in this version are also much more important and much more understandable. While before they weren't really complex, now you can actually see when you have certain status effects, and you can see when the enemies have them, so it's just a lot more simple and easy to understand. It's a lot more intuitive. And if I'm correct, I think they also replaced the blind status effect with one that slows down how fast your action bar fills up, so I think that's a cool little addition. So instead of having to deal with RNG base missing, which is always annoying, you can just slow down enemies, or slow down yourself if it gets inflicted on you. While the regular enemies still go down pretty easily, the Zone Guardians I feel like got a good touch-up. Dedan has this weird clock theming that allows him to inflict sleep on you. Japhet has the muted status effect that he can apply in combination with his songbird attack, so I think that's a good status effect to pair with him. And Enoch is still kind of forgettable. I forget exactly what his gimmick was, but he did have a gimmick, which is better than last time. On top of the regular bosses getting a little glow up, there are 6 new bosses that are introduced with this version of the game, and all of them are very good, with one glaring exception, but I won't go into that now because that's spoiler related. In the purified zones you can explore once you kill the Guardian bosses, you can find the new bosses, and these are probably the best bosses in the game just from a gameplay standpoint. They have interesting gimmicks, or they just have some sort of unique identity that is unique to them in the game, where it doesn't just feel like they're an enemy with extra health. For an example, the new lion boss, Source, will start off the fight with it by just healing. It will heal off any attacks you will throw at it, but if you're able to lower its health enough, it will start to drain your health, and it will start to afflict poison status effects and all that stuff. So it has a unique identity there. And I think that's interesting. I'm not going in depth with more of the bosses just because I don't want to spoil all of them yet. And even if the ones I am going to spoil, I don't want to just explain their gimmicks verbatim because I want you to go fight them and explore. While we're talking about gameplay in general, I also want to mention while the puzzles have the same solutions as they did last time, all of the new content is pretty easy to find if you just explore. There's 3 bosses, 1 per purified zone that you can find. Then there's one in the room that I think that appears after you kill all 3 of them. Then after that, there's a boss that appears on the world map, or the zone map, in the, in-between nothingness void that you can find. And then after that, you find a staircase that leads to a boss before you fight Hugo and flip the switch. So, all of the bosses are pretty easy to find, and honestly, taking them down is much harder than finding them, which I appreciate, because I don't really like when games add new stuff and then you have to spend hours and hours looking for the new stuff. It's I just want the new stuff. But thankfully, Off is nice to you, and you just have to do some light exploring to find it. Especially if you know how the old maps look, you'll know where the new stuff is, because you'll be like, oh, that door wasn't there before. Overall, I think the combat in the original Off was its weakest point, and the remake does a very good job of doing that. Or, I'm not sure if this is technically a remake as much as it is a port that's remade on a new engine, because the gameplay is probably the biggest difference in the game itself, so I'm glad that they did decide to take the worst part of the original game and make it much better, and honestly, that alone is worth the price of admission, in my opinion, at the very least. So, with that, I'm going to start talking about some spoilery stuff, so if you want to go into the game blind, which I heavily recommend, please click off now and go play the game. And if you don't care about spoilers, I'm not going to go out of my way to explain everything for you, so tough luck. Okay, so while the new bosses offer a good challenge combat-wise, it's everything else about them that I feel a bit mixed on. First of all, their designs are good, but I think this is kind of a funny complaint to have. I think Mortis Ghost's art is improved too much to the point where they look a little out of place, because the older designs look a bit more sketch-like, while the newer ones look like it's someone trying to draw sketch-like, if that makes sense. It also feels like the newer enemies are a bit more rounder, if that makes any sense, while the older ones were a bit more jagged and messy. But again, that's a very minor complaint, and that is very much just a nitpick, so I don't want people to think I think the game is bad or anything because of that. I haven't looked too much into people's opinions on the new content because I kind of wanted to make this review not blind, but I wanted to make this review from my own perspective and not from everyone else's perspective. I didn't want to bandwagon, so if I'm saying something stupid, please tell me, because I'm not really seeing what everyone else's opinions are. These are just my opinions. But I think what people are going to have a problem with these new bosses are their placement in the world and kind of the lack of placement, if that makes any sense. I like to preface what I'm about to say with the knowledge that I have not read the new comic that comes with the Bad Human edition, so I don't know if there's any lore from that explains where these new bosses fit into the story, but from just playing the game, I don't even think they do fit into the story, and I think that's kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, they feel out of the way, and they don't feel like they're intruding on the main story that the game is trying to tell. It doesn't feel like there's a bunch of new stuff that's trying to be more important than the old stuff. On the other hand, it's kind of confusing why they're even here at all, considering they don't really feel like they fit into the world, so they don't really have any lore connected to them because they're not trying to intrude on the story, so you don't really know why they're there, or why they're themed after Zodiacs, or why they're connected to Cobb, or where they used to be. Are they survivors from the old world that's implied to have existed before Hugo created all this new stuff? Are they part of that? Are they like Hugo? Who knows? No one tells you anything about them. I didn't really understand Off's original story for a while, so there's a very good chance I'm just missing something obvious that I haven't figured out yet. But it also just feels confusing, because I feel like these new bosses have some story, but they just refuse to tell it to us. The most interesting thing about them are their death quotes, or their intro battle quotes, but lots of them just try to give a little snippet of character. The only one who feels like his dialogue actually means anything is Cobb, but even then, that could just be written off as poetic nonsense. My favorite of the Zodiac bosses is Just Us, just because he's a little goober who kind of acts like the batter. Maybe he is the batter. Maybe the batter is him. Who knows? Again, there is a very good chance lots of the lore around these guys are just meant to be mysterious for the sake of being mysterious, considering they only appear in the purified zones, like the secretaries. So maybe they're like them, and they're just kind of there to be spooky. At the end of the day, I do hope this band of misfits has some sort of backstory or underlying meaning, because if they were just there to be extra bosses and extra content, that would feel a little unfortunate, I guess. Because again, Off has never really been like something like Five Nights at Freddy's, where it has all this deep lore that you need to search around for answers for. It's very much a more abstract game, but I still feel like there was some sort of meaning you could pull from it if you looked hard enough. Well, I'm not really getting that with these new bosses, but then again, I might just be stupid. That's a very possible possibility. That's a dumb sentence. Why did I write that? There is one last thing I'd like to talk about, though. The final boss. Now, in the original Off, no matter whose side you chose, I feel like the fight was a little too easy, and maybe that makes sense. Hugo went down really easily. Maybe the final boss is supposed to be the queen, Vaderiola. And I even understand if the batter's ending is easy, because the judge has no reason to be able to put up a fight against the batter at this point, especially with our help. But what didn't really make sense to me is the fact that the batter would die so easily if you side with the judge. And my interpretation for a while was just that the batter was only strong with us at his side, and it was our influence that made him so powerful and able to take on the Spectres and take on the Guardians. And once we decided to side with the judge, he both lost that power and the judge got more power, so it was trivial to beat him. Now, when I first played the game, I sat down for 5 hours, got all the achievements, and the first ending I did was the official batter ending. And yeah, Pablo went down like a little bitch, nothing new. But it was when I fought the bad batter as the judge where I felt like this fight became something interesting and special. Because you feel like the judge is in this position where he has literally nothing left to lose, really even nothing to gain if he wins this fight, but he fights regardless, because it's the right thing to do, even if there's not even really a reason to do the right thing anymore. Now, the first time I did this fight as the batter, the fight didn't last long enough to get the music to play very long, so I just thought the song was okay, it was fine enough for an Avatar beat replacement. But in this fight, when you actually feel like the batter is an actual threat you need to stay alive against and use items against, I actually got a chance to listen to the whole song, and holy moly, this song is good. Okay, now I do still prefer Avatar Beat just because it kind of encompasses that whole empty, pointless feeling that the fight is going for, while Chosen New goes for a more grand feeling, which I still feel like does work, and I feel like it shows how much music can change the context of a scene. So I'm just saying, I think both are good, but I still think Avatar Beat is better. I just think it's so cool how they managed to put a different spin on the fight and still make it feel good. Overall, to close this section out, I feel like it's just nice that this game was able to make me feel like I'm playing the game for the first time again, which is just a magical feeling that few games can achieve. Overall, I do believe this is the definitive way to play off, and just experience off. Now, obviously the original RPG Maker version still exists as its own unique piece of art, and any new versions can't take that away from it. But I do think this is a good way to experience the story and just experience Mortis Ghost's world that he's created here. And I'm glad even more people are going to get to experience it now that it's on Steam and on consoles. And hey, even if you don't like the music, or just would rather have the old music, I'm sure someone is going to eventually make a mod that reintegrates the original music to replace any new songs where it would have played. Off is an amazing game, and I'm glad to get an excuse to play it again. And I hope you enjoyed this mini review sort of thing. I don't know if it's a mini review because it's about like half an hour long. I'm not sure how these things work. I'm a professional, can't you tell? No, but in all seriousness, if you've watched this far, I really appreciate that you've gone out of your way to listen to me and just listen to my thoughts on this 17-year-old game. If you liked this video and want to see more from me, please consider commenting, and subscribing, and maybe sharing the video with a friend if you think you know someone who would like this video. I do intend to continue making reviews and retrospectives on games I like and series I like, so please stick around for that, especially considering that I'm going to try to get better with editing and all that good stuff. Scripting, everything, I'm going to try to make the videos better is what I'm trying to say. So, hopefully you'll stick around for that. And if you don't, that's also okay too. I really appreciate that you just stuck around and watched this video to the end. It means a lot to me. Before I go, I'd also like to thank my 2 Patreon subscriber member thingies, Sven Biscuit and Skill Issue 22822. So, thank you both for your continued support, and my Patreon will be linked down below if you would like to support me in that way. Of course, there's no pressure, I'm just leaving that as an option. With all that being said, have a good day, and good night.